Book 1, Law of Salimi Chapter 6, titled Bad Student. Considering how much time I had spent not learning in class, my result in primary school was expectedly poor. In a class of 50 students, I've always managed to get number 30 or above, which is indicative of me being a bad student. The best student in my class during primary school was almost always been some hardworking female student. I never worried, though my parents were worried. Apparently, not focusing on learning in classes contributed significantly towards my poor performance in education. I could highlight the fact that I was constantly being bullied throughout my primary school, and the stressful life I had to endure at a very young age might have contributed on me not focusing in class. However, if I did that, it would be a lie. The truth is, I am not truly interested in learning at that time. It is of nobody's fault, but just my decision that I made at that time. It might be because I was bored with learning, I guess. Still, being bullied did occupy an enormous pressure to me. It made me filled with anger almost constantly. I am angry because I cannot understand why I was bullied, or why I cannot take any action to retaliate. I was confused and angered at the situation and suffering endured. It truly was mentally exhausting to keep up living when it seemed that there was nothing that I can do about it. Alas, the teachers were unable to resolve the matter. I was in distraught. I felt helpless. I felt small. I felt weak. I felt that I was nothing. While my studies in my primary school might not be affected much, it was different when it comes to secondary school. When I reached 13 years old, I attended my secondary school or high school at Sekolah Menengah Taman Melawati. While my primary school is 50 meters away from my home, this secondary school that I had attended is about 1.5 to 2 kilometers in distance from my home. I spent 3 years there, from Form 1 to Form 3. Here, I never really focused about studying as well, since my mind was occupied by the mental scar left from being bullied in primary school. Sadly, the situation did not change as I attended secondary school. I was the most coveted target of bullies at school. Clearly, it was not due to my charming personality or good looks, but simply I was an easy target because of my physical size, my small physical size. In the eyes of the school bullies, I was weak due to my relatively small size. Physically speaking, it is true that I was weak and unable to defend myself back then. However, since I had already suffered harrowing experiences being bullied in primary school, I told myself that I would never let anyone else to bully me ever again. One could argue that this turning point in my story might be the silver lining or the positive effect of my experience being bullied throughout my primary school. At the age of 13 years old, I became a person that had unbroken will and immovable resolve to deter and fight against bullies. Essentially, I ignored about learning anything during my secondary school while focusing on surviving and preparing to fend off any bullies that wished to lay their hands upon me. Was this the best decision made by a 13 years old? Honestly, I do not know. However, what I do know is that at 13 years old, I promised myself that I would never cry again or admit defeat to anyone ever again. I was resolved to prepare myself towards learning and doing everything possible to never again experience any form of bullying from anyone, regardless of the numbers or size of the bullies. At Sekolah Menengah Taman Melawati, my secondary school, the bullies are abundant. Students who leads the bullying simply choose anyone who they deem as weak or lame based on their biased opinion. Since the leader of the bully are popular or famous for their bad deeds, many other students around them tend to join their group of bullies in order to protect themselves from being the target of bullies. As a result, every classroom has a huge amount of mob or groups of bullies that causes harm to targeted students almost on daily basis. This is the picture taken as a class picture. I'm there somewhere. It's up to you to decide which one am I. So let's continue. Targeted students were hit and attacked by 10 or to 20 students in a burst of excitement and explosion of rage by the bullies. The victim might not suffer serious injuries, but I had seen some bad experience of being trampled, with the victim's head being stabbed on the floor and screaming in pain. In most cases, the rampage of attacks would cost on school's uniform of the victim due to being attacked by 10 to 20 students. The reason to be chosen as victim would simply be due to any action taken by the victim that does not please the bullies. In many occasions, the targeted student could become the victim simply for no apparent reason, but just because the bullies are bored. The bullies are becoming a group of gangsters that beat up students for fun and the thrill of fighting a weak student. Since I started joining my secondary school, I have been targeted, but had never been an actual victim of these bullies, even though there were many bullies who wished to victimize me due to my small physical size. Luckily for me, I was motivated, resolved to survive, and willing to do anything from being bullied by anyone. In order to survive, I observed these bullies, and I realized that they possess certain attributes that made them appearing dangerous and threatening towards other students. They are extremely smart, as most of the leaders of the group were best students and pretend as good, obedient students in front of the teacher while command respect as the leader of the bullies. In a class of 50 students, about 30 students were joining the bullies group in order to avoid being targeted students or victims of bullying. I observed that numerous of my friends who hate bullying simply join them out of necessity and fear from being a target. In my case, I analyzed the leader and started to develop certain characteristics that made them leaders of the group. One of these characteristics was possessing a long hair, which means defying the school law in Sekolah Menengah Taman Melawati about the regulation on every students were required to have short hair. Essentially, defying any school rules were considered as desired characteristics of great leaders amongst the bully groups. Any students who managed to avoid being captured by the discipline teacher or any authority in the school by possessing a long hair was considered as revered leader and rebellious character. The longer your hair would mean the more adopt your mischievous and disobedient attitudes as a student. Most leaders had long hair concealed by numerous creative means which avoid detention by the discipline teachers. Any hair from male student that could reach your nose was considered respectful length of hair in our school. Basically speaking, the longer your hair for a male student meant that you are defying against the school rules and regulation, thus making you popular bad student that had very high chance from being targeted as the bully victim. If you look at an army of lions, long hair for a male student can be compared to the alpha lion that leads the group of lions as their leader. Honestly, I do not agree in my heart, but it does work for the students in my secondary school at that time. Hence, I attended the school, I wore a kupiah, a head covering which is known as songkok. Okay. This picture is taken at the age of 24 years old when I was teaching at a private college. The reason that I embedded this picture is to show you, the reader, about songkok or kupiah that I always wore during my life. As a 13 years old student, I wore a songkok which was very similar to the picture above. If you look at the picture, it appears that I had a bald shaved head, since my hair can be perceived on the side of my head was shaved and very short. Psychologically speaking, when a normal human being would shave their head, it is expected for the person to shave their whole head. In my case, at 13 years old, I used the expectation and presumption to appear having very short or shaved head. However, in reality, I had a long hair hidden underneath my songkok, which can be considered as a clever method to conceal my long hair. Let me state here as a disclaimer, I do not like having a long hair or having to deceive others using my songkok. But I have to do everything possible to survive and never again being a victim of bullies. Due to this method, I was the students with the longest hair amongst male students because this strategy was the most successful method of concealing long hair from authority and disciplined teachers. My long hair was considered to be defying the school rules and regulation that I had created strong barriers from being targeted as the victim of bullies in that school. However, I never participated in the bullying because I know how horrifying the experience as a bully victim had to undergo at a very young age. The decision to never participate in bullying other students had caused ire amongst the leaders of the bully group, even though I gained their respect for defying the school rules and regulations. To me, I was brought up with the teachings of Islam, which means I cannot cause harm to others, which include to never participate in any form of bullying. Soon, even with the longest hair amongst the male students in our school, I started to become a target again, since I did not join their group of bullies and I was not their targeted victim. To solve this problem, I began gathering students who were also targeted as victims of the bully to develop a small group that would counter any attempt to target us as the next victim of bully. Still, the members who are willing to help me against the crowd of mob was small and filled with fear. It was only about 5 students that were willing to defend ourselves from being the target of bullies. Even so, it prolonged the duration of any our group members being targeted as the bully victim. It seemed that the 20 members of bullies did not dare face against 5 students who were determined to give up everything in order to avoid being bully victim. It was a fear campaign that managed to protect the 5 of us students from being victims of bully. Eventually, the leaders of the bully group began to devise a new plan to target me as the latest victim of bully. I became the most coveted target of bully victim in my secondary school, which was prolonged for 3 years. As a result, the leaders began to seek more members from other classes. After the examination of PMR or middle school examinations, the leaders of bully groups from all 3 classes had reached an agreement to attack me before the school session ended, hence developing rage from the bullies group which was prolonged. Hence, the developing rage from the bullies group, which was prolonged for 3 years against me, started to pile up and began to reach its climax. Instead of having to face 20 students attacking 5 students, their number grew up to 40 or more students from other classes. They had been waiting to attack me since the last 3 years and could end up in the worst attack by the bully group in our secondary school history. Soon, the word of the attack preparation started to spread. The horror and the defeat seemed inevitable. With the odds of more than 40 students attacking 5 victims starting to look unbearable, the 5 male students who initially willing to protect each other started to feel the danger and pressure from these huge numbers of attackers. In the end, the 5 students started to cave in and began to steer away from becoming the victims. I was left all alone without any students willing to help me. The odds suddenly became significantly worse. I was facing to fend off more than 40 students all by myself. On the day of the attack, the students who joined to attack me started to gather. Students' numbers began piling at the back of the classroom. As smart as the leaders were, they took my back to ensure that I was not able to run away without facing the attack. Evidently, it was about to be the biggest attack of the bully group against a single small-sized male student, which is known as me. Any support from other students were rescinded in order for them to save themselves from inevitable damnation that was about to descend. I do not really blame them, but because no one who is sane would protect one victim against more than 40 attackers from the bullies. Fear would overcome any form of justice that existed in their hearts. To make matters worse, the bullies began to close both classroom doors and lock them from the outside. One way or another, it seemed that I was going to die in that particular damn day. At least that was what every members of the bullies were thinking at that time. Other students, mostly female students in my class, started to move their tables and chairs to the side of the classroom to avoid being caught in the attack that was about to commence as soon as the final bell of the school would rung. The tension builds up. The bullies were becoming more excited to attack me. Me, honestly, I was shitting my pants, figuratively speaking. I was losing my mind and sanity. Fear started to eat up my bravery as every single second began to pass and the time for my doom leaned closer. Defeat began looming in my mind. In a few minutes, the bell of the school would ring and the mob of bullies would begin charging at me. How can I possibly defend against more than 40 students charging at me with intent to harm me? Did I survive the attack? Well, to be continued. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you join me back in the next video to learn of the outcome of this bullying program. Okay, thank you very much. See you soon.